What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Grant Hughes. We are delivering you our Western Conference mailbag as promised, where we will get to one or two questions for every single team. Thank you all for submitting your questions. Before we get started, please remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're consuming us. If you're on YouTube right now, hit that sub button, like, comment, help the algorithm love us back. Subscribe on your podcast player of choice, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, wherever you're consuming us. If you've done all those things, please shout us out, tell people about us, friends, family members, enemies, coworkers, random people on the street about this shitty basketball podcast you listen to that you would like to help expand their audience for. And follow us on the socials at HardwoodKnocks on Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok, at Hardwood_Knocks on Instagram. With all that out of the way in under a minute, I might add, Grant, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing well. You got to give me more time to think about the answer to your question. I usually need 90 seconds minimum. I'm doing great. I had a good Christmas. Looking forward to the new year. Writing about New Year's resolutions right now for work. So that's cool. But yeah, I'm excited to do this. Great questions again, everybody. This is a super helpful exercise as always. So I think that's enough ado. So without further ado, you want to start with the Western Conference alphabetical number one team, the Dallas Mavericks?
Yeah, so I have Dallas, and we have two questions that are pretty related to each other. Somesh Narayan asks, agree or disagree, the Mavs are better than their record suggests. They have a ton of bad losses when they dropped big leads to bad teams and have lost the 4 games Luka rested in, including the recent Minnesota game where he was ejected, which they should have won. They will be a threat come playoff time because, as Luka showed last year, he can take out anyone. And then Quinn has a two-part question. So the first part of it is there any evidence to suggest the Mavs could rise in the standings and make a run? And if so, what is it? And so we can go and look at their schedule if we wanted to. If you look at their point differential as well, they're on pace to underperform their point differential per clean glass by about 4 wins. They should be about a 47-48 win team, and they're on pace to win between 43 and 44. So I guess there is evidence that they could be better. I would point out, though, like losing close games or not being able to win without Luka or blowing big leads, like those are actual problems that you just can't write off. They might be high variance moments, but close games or leads, those are going to come at you in the playoffs. And so I do think, there's been a normalization a little bit on their shooting. They're now 11th when it comes to 3-point accuracy from beyond the arc, and that's a good sign. I think we've also seen over the past month, Luka's load has gotten a little bit lighter. He's still superhuman, but more of his buckets are coming off assists. His usage is dropped. Probably some of those wins have helped a little bit as well. There's still like the peaks and valleys from Tim Hardaway Jr., but you're seeing some more peaks. We've seen some of Reggie Bullock shooting normalize when he's gotten to play. Missing, Maxi Kleber is going to be huge for them down the stretch. So I don't, there's the second part of this question from Quinn about what could they do to improve, but I wanted to throw it to you on just your thoughts with the Mavericks. Do you think this team is better than it has showed this season? Because when I look at it, I kind of feel like, are they 8th in the West? Are they that team? Like, I don't know. I probably expected them to finish like maybe 6th or so, but they're not like underachieving to the extent that I feel like they're due for this huge bump in performance without changing anything.
Yeah, I think you're kind of having to deal with two. I mean, I would do the same thing you did, and I'd start with the point differential. And it suggests they're a couple, they're short a couple wins from where they ought to be at this point in the season. And that translates to 4 or 5 extra, whatever, over the course of the year. So in that sense, yeah, they are a little better than they've seemed. But I think so. Trusting the clutch stuff for them is just different for almost every other than it is for almost every other team because what's the prevailing narrative surrounding Luka and how the Mavs have used him forever? It's that he wears down. And like, you can split it by half, you can split it by quarters. And the fact is like, it just is all, it's not a perfect declining, trend line, but he just, you get to the fourth quarter and he's shooting 42% from the field and just under 27% from 3. And those are the worst numbers in any quarter. And that's just what happens, and it happens over the course of a playoff series. It happens over the course of a season. The wear down is just real. And so if you're saying, well, they've had some rough clutch luck, it's like, well, it's because their best players kind of gassed by the end of the game. And you can't count on that normalizing necessarily. That flies in the face of the
They have a winning record in the clutch right now. They're 12-10.
Yeah,
Their point differential is pretty bad, but they're 12-10. So you could argue that they've maybe gotten even a little bit lucky in some of those games.
Which way does that cut? Like, I suppose it would depend on if they do change, the usage distribution and their style of play. And, I thought that was a really interesting game. We may have talked about it last time when Luka was out and Kemba Walker had like a 30 something percent usage rate and played, 40 something, some odd minutes. And it made you think, like, is this just how they play? It's not even Luka specific. They just have to operate with one guy. Not really true looking at some of the other games that Luka has missed where, guys like Dinwiddie and others have more evenly split the usage. But yeah, I kind of feel like the Mavs are right about where they ought to be. I don't think they profiled as a serious contender on the level of, the top 3 or 4 teams in the league. And I don't think, they're grossly under or overperforming. They're just this kind of about right. So I don't know what the change is that they make. I don't think it's going to be an in-season thing. So this is just kind of where they are to me.
And look, they might still just be a threat come playoff time because they have
Sure.
Luka. And so if he's not going to wear down, I would agree with that statement. We've seen Luka be an absolute killer in the playoffs. The second part of Quinn's question, also, what is the Mavs' current problem other than just making shots? And so there are a couple things that I look at. Their rim protection is not the volume they're allowing at the rim is fine, but their rim protection is not good. Losing Maxi Kleber is going to hurt that. Teams are probably going to go after Christian Wood even more. Are there ways for them to cover that up? But that's something that we just need to see bear out. We haven't seen a ton of, at least relative to what you would expect, of like Spencer Dinwiddie, Luka Doncic, and Christian Wood playing together. You only had Wood recently go into the starting 5. And so that's a concern for me overall. And I don't know if I would call this a bigger concern, but it's not even the just making shots. It's the offensive diversification. And it's, yes, they have the best half court offense statistically in the league right now. They're also dead last in transition frequency and not really having that change of pace gear. We saw it in a couple games and some at points during the Lakers where it was like, oh, they pushed off of live balls. They need to have that element. And I think they need to have it even with Luka on the floor just to vary up their attack. And that would be a way of them generating some more organic rim pressure, which is like their own offense. It doesn't, I don't want to say it gets lost because people do talk about it, but they're a team that if you didn't have Luka, like we would probably be talking more about, oh, like why doesn't this team get to the rim more? It just doesn't matter because Luka's so amazing at every single level, particularly from the top 2 when you're looking at 3-pointers and then just from the mid range. And so changing up the pace at which you're playing. And they're not, again, I don't want to say they're necessarily built to do that, but like you can push off of live balls. Like that's something every team can do. And that's what, has kind of helped Philly a little bit during their winning streak. And so I'd like to see more of it from Dallas. And that's just me focusing on controllables with the roster. When it comes to just like, well, what's wrong with this team? I don't want to bemoan just they need another co-star, but they need a higher end number 2 because like maybe you're going to carve out enough ball handling from Kemba and Luka and Spencer Dinwiddie. Okay, fine. But like you need then at this point, I think with Kleber down, like you probably need that front court player who can either play some 5 and hold up defensively or is going to need to be tethered to a Christian Wood if you want to maximize his minutes where he's going to space the floor, but can also maybe be a center on defense. So that would be the player for them to target via trade. Going back to their assets very quickly, and we've talked about this before, they can't theoretically convey a pick until 2025. And that's assuming their pick to the Knicks top 10 protection conveys this year. They're just better off because they don't have any blue chip prospects. If you ever want to take a swing, you are better off waiting until the offseason when you can trade 4 picks, 3 swaps once the league calendar resets and then like salary filler. And so, no, I don't expect them to make a big move in large part. I just don't think they're built to make one.
Yeah, I agree. I think, with that, you don't want to get too far down the overthinking it road because it is just, they need, what are the needs? There's nothing different really. It's the second star or, try to be Porzingis and they're kind of going without. It was sort of Jalen Brunson. And now they have not replaced that really effectively. And yet the team isn't really that meaningfully different, which is really just more of a statement on what Luka is capable of doing as far as like elevating a roster that just is short on a couple of important things. The other thing that's interesting is like, I think we ascribe the super low transition frequency to Luka. Just, he doesn't want to push. He doesn't want to push. But I think the fact that they're also bad in transition defense, they're a bottom 10 team in transition defense in terms of the points they allow. They're pretty good at preventing transition, but that's just more of a tactical thing. It's not a personnel thing. You just don't go to the
Yeah.
offensive boards. I think it's a little bit of a statement on, they're not the most athletic team. They sort of have to make concessions with who they're playing at center. That guy's always limited in one way or the other. I think what they really need is like the best possible version of Kleba. And like, that's probably not Kleba, but it's just, whatever that player type is, it's a weird player type because the best version of that guy could guard, a first option wing, defend the rim a little bit and shoot threes. There's like I mean,
That's
I
not
don't know
even
who.
Miles Turner. I'm not saying Kleber's more valuable than Miles Turner, but his skill set is, or at his peak, is
Yeah.
so specialized.
Yeah. It's a real niche. I mean, it's a weird collection of skills that Kleba just doesn't have anymore, even if healthy. That's a weird guy to get. I don't know who you'd even say approximates that.
I know we're moving at a better pace, but the other thing that I feel like we have to note is just the margins in the West or in the league this year are so unbelievably small. And this sounds a lot like doom and gloom for the Mavericks. But to the first question about, are they going to be a threat in the playoffs or are they much better than expected? Like they're 4 games out of first place as we're recording this. And so that's not, and they're top 12 in defense, top 7 in offense. It hasn't been pretty. And there are ways that I think we both believe they could optimize the current roster better. But it isn't all doom and gloom. It's just that there's absurd parity right now. And I think that that's why these high variance, maybe either smaller issues or smaller sample size, like those are going to come back to really, really matter, specifically when you're talking about postseason seeding.
Yeah, agree. Let's go to Denver. This has some of the same elements of the last question, but this is from JT Alexander. How do the Nuggets make a championship winning team around Jokic? To be specific, it's how do the Nuggets or anybody, not that he's going anywhere, but sort of what's the theory of a championship winning roster around Jokic? This is a really difficult question, and there's almost no way to go at it without we have to start with the concession that even if, some of the advanced metrics really love Jokic's defense, Raptor has always been high on him. Generally, he grades out pretty well defensively if you're just looking at the metrics. It's my opinion, and I think we have to concede for the purposes of this question that he just presents defensive challenges to a roster that so far have been that's the problem. And maybe not the problem. You could say health last year was the problem, but just generally speaking, it's very difficult to play a championship level defense with a center that is not a vertical shot blocking threat, that isn't the most laterally quick, even if he's smart, even if he has great hands, even if he does all this other stuff right. That's just the reality of it. And so, the issue then is, well, so what are you looking for? You need versatility, good defenders at the point of attack, because you're going to have to play some styles where, Jokic has to come up to the screen. He can't be in drop coverage. He's not Brook Lopez. That just doesn't work. He can't switch. So you're limited really in what you can do. So you have to have wings and guards that are able to really, in tandem with Jokic, just slow the initial point of attack action down. Like you can't let the ball handler that, Jokic is kind of hedging out on, get rid of it quickly to somebody open. You definitely can't let him get around both of those defenders and just throw the whole defensive rotation into chaos. So, I mean, to that effect, Aaron Gordon and KCP are both like pretty good in that regard. Now, Bruce Brown is another one. Smart teams are going to, switch around and try to hunt more matchups where you're not attacking those guys. But that's kind of the starter there. I think that's your defensive issue. If you could add Draymond Green to the roster and suddenly you have a switchable guy that can defend the rim and do all this other stuff, great. Like that's your solve, but there's one of him. And that's just, he's the solve. He or someone similar would be the solve anywhere. Aaron Gordon is kind of a decent, poor man's version of that. So that's the defensive struggle. I don't know how you do that. Offensively, I think Denver doesn't have any offensive questions. You put enough good shooting, a second side attacker, which is like, MPJ and peak Murray, you're set. I think offensively for any playoff series. I'm just trying to think let's look at the numbers. Maybe this will tell it. So essentially you have the Nuggets ranked right now defensively are 28th. I'm going to have to double check that. They're bottom 10. And for these purposes, what you need to know is that, and you've seen this stat come up several times over the years, the idea that you got to be a top 10 defense to win a title. So the Nuggets are way far away from that. I think maybe they're 15th actually, but they have the 28th, location-based effective field goal percentage. So here's the idea. Here's how you get around that if the Nuggets are going to win a title with a defense like this. The only teams to do it outside the top 10 in defensive efficiency since 1981 are the 95 Rockets, who are 12th, the 01 Lakers, who are 21st, and the 18 Warriors, who are 11th. Every single one of those teams was a defending champion that flipped a switch, that had the personnel, that had all that stuff. The Nuggets just aren't that team. So how do you build a championship defense around Jokic? I guess you have to win a title first somehow, and then the next year when they're ranked 15th or whatever it is, you can do it. We've said we weren't going to be doom and gloom about Dallas. It is kind of doom and gloom for Denver because I don't personally believe that there's a way to build a defense around Jokic that can be top 10 and like a big value add against the best playoff offenses. I don't see it.
So I would disagree and think that, one, there's a chance they may have already done it. And I'd be curious to see what happens if this team is at full strength for more this season. Or, Kawhi had said this about his ACL injury, and there's been a lot of talk about Jamal Murray sort of waxing and waning this year. These are 2-year recoveries. Like, you miss a year and then you're working your way back, basically. And so maybe Jamal Murray is going to be better defensively, because he was always kind of an underrated hard-nosed defender by the time that you get to the playoffs. And the other thing is just like, because there's been the trickle down of Michael Porter Jr. being absent, like some of your best lineups have been defensive juggernauts this year. And would it be easier to survive minutes, with the bench if you had Michael Porter Jr. to mix and match in, or like maybe even, I guess the Bruce Brown bench stuff was kind of noisy. I feel like Denver's main issue, I'm more concerned about their bench than their defense. And I don't want to belabor the point you made about the way that they defend. They finally tried some different things, it felt like, over the past few games, and they like worked out where it's like, hey, let's be, you're still kind of using Jokic the same way, but you're being more aggressive with size and length elsewhere. And maybe that's the recipe. And so that's why Christian Brown might be so valuable to them. It's what if you have Aaron Gordon and you have KCP and you have Bruce Brown. Those guys are the answers. Maybe it's, and again, this still means that you have to tailor your team to Jokic. Is it you need an Aaron Gordon and then like a Jeremy Grant in tandem with each other? Because then you're talking about like, you mentioned being able to guard up top and at the point of attack, but there's also just going to be points where Jokic gets beats or guys get by him or he isn't drop. And so you need size, length, quickness behind him. And the way you use Aaron Gordon, it's not always going to be him. And so you're going to have to rely on these other guys. Michael Porter Jr. has shown the ability to do it in the past. I don't know that you could rely on him. And so the Nuggets are and remain my title pick. I don't change my title picks anyway. I don't know if they've built the championship defense yet. I do think they're closer to it than not. And it feels like, you could say, well, having one Jeremy Grant away, and I'm just spitball. I mean, Jeremy Grant back in Denver would be fantastic, but that type of a player, that's a more feasible get than, you need another top 10 star on your team to do it. And so maybe it's just they've leaned too far into like the point of attack-ish defenders, because Bruce Brown and even KCP, like, no, they're not small, but they're not huge. And so like someone who's an Aaron Gordon size, like someone else like that, which is why I've kind of wondered, he's not the answer, but like Zeke Naji is starting to play now, in large part because of the Jeff Green injury. And so it feels like if they need something, it's that type of a player. And yes, it'd be nice if it was OG Anunoby, but it doesn't need to be that good, or he doesn't need to be that good, is my point. And so that's just sort of where I'm at with the Nuggets.
Yeah, I think it's just so difficult because, as I say, you can't, I don't see a way to build a championship roster around Jokic. I also sort of feel like the roster they have right now is almost as good as you can do, with the exception of like, well, they don't have like Andrew Wiggins or, just Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, or like just someone to really put the clamps on another wing. Because without that, like the reality is just I just don't see a way to survive as a playoff defense when everybody finishes everything around the rim. And the Nuggets are pretty good at preventing rim frequency, but when I looked these stats up last night, opponents are shooting 71% at the rim. And that's like, Jokic isn't really the driver necessarily of that. Like, it's not just him. It does feel tactical. It does feel schematic. It does feel like, because of the way Denver has to play, when that first level is beaten, it's too easy to get clean looks at the rim. And like, that's the first thing a really good title worthy defense takes away. And if you can't even handle that, then like everyone's subject to the vagaries of a hot 3-point shooting night from another team, or, whatever else, foul drawing, that kind of thing. But if you can't defend the rim, and it's just that's where the buckets are easiest to come by. That's just such a hill to climb. I hate to be so negative about it, but I just haven't seen anything that convinces me that without adding, like, just take your pick of some elite defensive piece, that Denver can get there. And that's like, this is with the offense that might just, they're second, I think, right now, that has like a ton of upside on top of being second. Like, you could just be one of the best offenses of all time. And I just don't know if that's enough. So sorry if that's too bleak for Denver fans.
Let's get to the Golden State Warriors. So this one comes from Samesh Narayan. Answers this question as well, and it's tied to Samesh Narayan and then Bulls Film Room. So the first question: where's the future of the Warriors with Curry out? They might even miss the play-in this season, and I mean, that's fair. I don't know that I would predict that, but they've been predictably not great in general without him. They're 2-3 as we record this. They had that win over the Grizzlies was really good, but they also haven't had Andrew Wiggins, so that's something to factor into that. So there's a chance they get better. You talked about before we were recording, we were talking about Jordan Poole, how he's come up relatively huge for them, still isn't hitting his threes, and that might be something to monitor. I don't know what becomes of this season, and it makes it harder to say, well, they should just trade someone and just for bench depth. I need to know Steph's timeline. As we record this, he's at least 2 weeks away from coming back from that shoulder injury, and you need a more concrete date and probably a more concrete understanding of where you are in the West before you decide whether to make a midseason move. And I might even bet against them making a midseason move anyway, just because that hasn't really been there outside of the D'Angelo Russell trade. That hasn't really been their MO. And that season was lost by that point. And this season isn't yet lost. I would predict that they will make at least the play-in. I don't know where you're at with that.
I think they'll be one of, it's so hard to say. Well, look, we just talked about the parity. So I think there's every opportunity for them to get healthy, get one of the young guys to contribute consistently. Jonathan Kuminga is closest in that regard right now, but even Moses Moody had good minutes against the Grizzlies. And he's kind of the guy that Warriors fans assumed, talking about Moody, was going to be the guy that could just give you 20 good minutes because he was just a plug and play wing. That hasn't been the case. I still think there's a lot of reason to believe that maybe that's possible. You see the games like they had against the Celtics, like they had against the Grizzlies, where the top flight version of this team is still really good. And, you can even look at the 5-man unit lineup data where the Warrior starters are still the best in net rating of any 5-man unit that's played any significant number of minutes. You need like 2 more guys to show up. And maybe that's DiVincenzo who's shot it better. So yeah, I could see for sure a top 6 record, because it's not that, I mean, what are they, how badly have things gone? And if you pull the standings up, they're like, what, a couple games out of it. They're, they're 2.5 games from like the 6th seed right now. So,
they're just, when you look at their point differential without Curry, it feels like this has the chance, depending on how long he misses, to go from manageable to just extremely dire, hopeless, whatever. That leads into the Bulls film room question, which is, should the Warriors just blow it up and build around their young guys and get picks back? My immediate answer is no, because you're obligated to. The one thing is, you still have Steph, and unless he's going to be shut down for the season, like, this season absolutely matters because Steph is that important and he's also that fucking good. The other thing is, and I'm not saying that these guys have no value, but who is giving you Godfather offers for any of the Warriors vets right now? You're not getting one for Clay. You're not getting one for Draymond, I don't think, especially with him being able to potentially become a free agent this summer. And then Jordan Poole is so tough to trade because he's on his poison pill. And like, I think he would probably, for most people, fall under the young guy umbrella anyway. And so, yes, if we're taking the cold, callous, like, business approach, yeah, you should. If someone came in and offered you the moon for Draymond, like, yeah, you should take it. No one's going to, though. And I think outside of Curry, their single most valuable veteran is Andrew Wiggins, he's injured. And so what are you getting for him? I understand why people might think along these lines. If they want to focus on the young guys, that would be one route to go, and we'll have to see how the season unfolds. But you can start looking at the ages of this core, and we're not, they used up their gap year gap years leeway. There's no gap year anymore, which is why I was an advocate of I would trade James Wiseman right now for depth. I would still do it. I'm out on James Wiseman, but I'm also just obsessed with maximizing Steph's timeline. I don't see the pathway to them though punting on this season while also capitalizing on it. Yeah, you have your own draft pick, so there's that. But I don't think that they could make, I don't know that they could make a star trade even if one became available. You have Kuminga, you have Moody, you could trade a first round pick in 2026, but because that's so far off into the distance, you need someone to be in love with Kuminga or Wiseman or both. And then also the star trade market doesn't exist. But then on the flip side of the equation is I don't think they have really the incentive to go the other route. Just I don't think that if they sold off their veterans, again, not named Steph, that they would get a ton to begin with. And so you're looking at sort of, middle of the road moves, which they're just not a team that feels like they're going to make, especially when a number 2 pick like James Wiseman would almost have to be involved, because the other complication here is the salary matching. If you're not trading Dre, Clay, Steph, or Andrew Wiggins, like there's Wiseman and there's Looney are like your primary salary matching tools. And so I would advocate against them doing anything nuclear, and that includes buying, just because I don't think that opportunity is out there. Now, if Pascal Siakam becomes available or if something along those lines develops, sure, we can talk. But as of right now, I would argue against them going the nuclear route in either direction.
Yeah, just real quickly, I don't think they're going to make a trade, and I don't think they should. And that's not because they don't need stuff. It's because the young guys have not played well enough or enough period to drive up the markets for them in trade. And like, if you're another team, what are you giving up for Wiseman at this point? Like, it's not going to be something that moves the needle. So you might as well just hold on to him, hope he rehabs his value so that you can trade him, or just become someone that you can actually play going forward. I don't know, like the odds are low, but I would still say that, the highest high-end outcome for guys like Wiseman and Kuminga are like quality starters. It's unlikely they reach those, I think, at this point. But if you've got that in one hand and you've got like, just name some, 7th or 8th guy in the other, I understand why they're just kind of going to stick to their guns. I still think just everything you read in here, and whether they're right or wrong, I do think that the belief among the Warriors is that when everybody's healthy and we get 1 or 2 guys kind of playing up to expectations outside of the starters, we can just beat anybody. And like, they might not be wrong. It's hard to see it right now, but they might not be wrong.
The final question here, which is quick to get to, James asks, who's the first person Draymond Green is calling after the Warriors are eliminated from playoff contention? And I would probably say Clutch Sports to see whether he needs to decline or pick up his player option. That's going to be a fascinating decision because he is owed, if he opts in next year, he gets $27.6 million. I don't know if there's more cap space out there, so maybe a team would be like, let's pay Draymond that. I think he can get noticeably more money over the longer term, even if it's at a less annual average. But I'm very fascinated to see, one, what he does with that player option, and 2, whether it ultimately leads to him bolting or staying in Golden State.
Yeah, he'll call LeBron, which you said Clutch Sports, so it's like the same thing, I guess. What do you think? I could see him going like 4 for 80 just to stay with the Warriors. It's kind of like the first big extension he signed, where it's like that feels like a reason, like a little bit risky, which it was not in that case. But I don't know. I feel like he's not going to, I don't feel like he's $100 million guy, just because like the market for him is just so narrow.
And I'll go through the teams very quickly that could theoretically offer him 4 for 80 this summer, or at least get there. Charlotte, potentially. They would have to renounce PJ Washington. Detroit, easily. Houston and Indiana, easily. The Lakers, the Thunder, the Magic, and probably not the Kings, because I'm assuming they want to keep Harrison Barnes, and then the Spurs.
Yeah. So it's Detroit and the Lakers are the only ones I think he would even remotely consider.
Right. So, yeah.
All right. I have the Houston Rockets. This is from Unbiased Pistons fan. How do the Rockets look like they have too many guys, but also not enough guys? The team is like 10 guys deep, but I feel like they all should be getting minutes. Is this what happens when you bottom out and get a lot of early picks? Too many guys you need to see, but not enough minutes to go around. So this is an interesting question that happens like almost any time you get a rebuild that hasn't quite gotten off the ground yet. And so just to go through some of the young guys, you're talking about Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., Jabari Smith Jr., Alperen Sengun. I'm throwing Tari Eason in there, Kenyon Martin Jr., even like someone like Usman Garuba. You could go way
Thank
down the
you. I
list and do like
appreciate that.
Dacian Nix and Josh Christopher if you want to, but
Don't throw
um,
Daisha Nix in there, but yeah, please don't.
um, so the issue here is none of these guys, I think, with the possible exceptions of Green and Şengün, have like star or superstar upside. And Şengün is a stretch you have to really be into like niche. You know, he's a great post player. He's an awesome passer. He makes a ton of mistakes still, but like the highs are high for him. And Green is just like a tier one athlete that is as fast as any human being on planet Earth in the open floor, but hasn't quite figured out how to turn that into like efficiency or foul drawing or just, you know, that kind of stuff, which is fine. The issue is like, it's not that this is what happens when you get a bunch of picks. It's what happens when all those picks don't really return a guy that is obviously, you know, your number one scoring playmaking option or the anchor to a defense. Because then it's kind of like, well, you know, we have all these options. Nothing's all that clear. Yeah, we should just poke around and see who can do what and what configurations work. And you kind of feel like you're not getting any answers. And I've used this all the time, but it's like, the idea that if you feel like you have a lot of good options, it means you don't have any great ones, because it's just, well, what's the difference between Jalen Green and, you know, Porter handling the ball a lot, or Smith, you know, spotting up all the time? It's just like, there's just not a blue chip. It doesn't feel like among this group. And so, yeah, like play everybody. And maybe it feels like some guys get squeezed or don't get enough touches, but that's just kind of how it works out. Related to that, we have a question from, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that. I mean, I don't, if you have any thoughts on the Rockets' makeup.
I would mostly agree with it. I'm probably higher than Jalen Green on you, and I think that Jabari Smith Jr. might end up being like real anchor defense material. Does that qualify him as blue chip? I think it's more so this, and I don't know if this is what the next question is about. Like, this team is ripe, even just because you're not, drowning in veterans. That's like, yeah, Eric Gordon, and then that's kind of it. Like, of the, the old heads on this team, they need a consolidation trade to maybe simplify and narrow their focus of what they're looking at.
Yeah, no, that's fair. The second question is from David Medallo, and it's about just asking about sort of the defensive metrics and the makeup of the Rockets' core guys like Green, Şengün, Jabari, and Eason. I'll start with Eason. I think Eason is like a stud defensive player, like a guy that you don't really build a defense around him, but you could totally envision him being a huge part of a really good defense for a very long time. EPM loves him. He's in the 100th percentile in steal rate for his position, which is very good. He plays really hard. He's really hard to screen. He can handle perimeter guys. He can get back and just like be a body in the lane. 4.2 deflections per 36 is elite. He's just causing trouble everywhere on and off the ball, and his energy is really infectious. It hasn't quite infected the rest of the team, but that's more of a statement on the other guys. The other guy who I think is interesting to talk about is Garuba. Is a little different than Smith. Smith has potential too, like you mentioned, as like kind of a switchable, good on ball guy with some length. But Garuba came billed. I don't know if you remember the sort of the draft write-ups on this guy, but as like a 5-position defender who could block shots. And he does move around the floor like someone that has that ability. He can move, he's mobile, he's long. But we just haven't seen enough. If he were that great consistently, he would be playing more, and he's just not. Green is a 0. Like, he is a bottom 10 defensive plus minus among qualified guys. Like, we're talking like the Trae Young, Jordan Poole tier of like the absolute most damaging guard defenders in the league. Not that surprising, just because he's like a guy with a thin build that is more straight line speed than quick twitch, and isn't down in a stance a lot. Just watching him, Şengün, I don't know. Like, he's not quick. He's not a help side shot blocker. He's pretty good if he's like in a defensive position and waiting for the rim attack. He can get up and at least contest. Doesn't get a lot of steals. Doesn't get a lot of blocks. He's a negative minus 0.3 in defensive estimated plus minus. Not awful, but like not an impact guy. He's kind of smart enough that maybe he could figure his way to being a high deflections, high disruptive steal guy. But other than Eason and then potentially Garuba and Smith, who's break even by most like metrics, DPM being one of them.
Which
not a lot of great
rookie? You're saying Smith, right?
Say again.
You're talking about Smith, right? Breaking even.
Yeah, Smith's break even. Eason is like a
That's
superstar.
great for a rookie.
Right. Not bad. Yeah, I mean, so I think probably for me, Smith's disappointment as an offensive player so far has like trickled into, the defense is cool, but if he's not going to be able to ever create space or get his own shot, and he's been better than he was in October, November, but I'm just kind of down on Smith as a prospect in general. Maybe that's not fair because you're right. Like he does have the frame and kind of the instincts to be a solid defender. I don't know if I see like, all defense upside necessarily, but compared to Eason, like Eason, I think absolutely has that.
Let's move on to our question for the Clippers. From this point forward, Kawhi Leonard will be a top blank player for the rest of the season. Look, he comes back December 5th in the win over Charlotte, hits a big time shot there. He's averaging over 20 points and 3 assists while shooting better than 50% on his twos. His 3-point clip has dipped a little bit, but we've seen him catch a groove there, specifically over his last, I don't know, like 3 games. He's hit like a higher percentage of his threes. It's so tough to measure. I think he's looked a lot better on offense. I think he's looked a little bit better on defense too. It's all about, if we're talking about just sheer ability, and you told me Kawhi Leonard is going to play almost every single game, we're only going to rest on one end of back-to-backs. I'd probably say that he's still a top 15 guy. I just don't know, is the availability going to justify that at this point? And as many people point out, like the Clippers schedule is very pre-All-Star break heavy, and then it lightens after that. And so I'm almost wondering if when he kind of has when the schedule kind of opens up a little bit, he'll be playing in a higher percentage of their games, and that will allow him or permit him to climb up these individual hierarchy standings. He is still a superstar. Like that is his apex. I just don't know how often or for how long he can sustain that apex. I'd be willing to say he'll be a top 15 to 20 player the rest of the way though. And that's just with me having watched, like he's not even all the way back yet. Like he's just not even all the way back. And so I think you like what you've seen from him. I probably like what I've seen from him on offense more than defense. Maybe the shot profile or the foul line frequency, maybe that worries you a little bit. But the Clippers have been like a very good defensive team all season. And I don't know that Kawhi still has like I'm going to swallow your soul gear for 40 minutes a night in him on that end. But this is still someone who's very much, when he's on, it's a star on both sides of the floor. And so I'd be willing to predict top 15, top 20, and not feel like that's too ambitious.
Yeah, that's so hard because you are just baking in that feels like the right range to me because you're baking in the availability concerns and that type of thing. But yeah, I agree. The bottom line is like, if he's right, he can be the best player on the floor against any team, full stop, for a game. Like, I don't know if that's true over a playoff series, but we're talking about the rest of the year. He's one of the hardest guys to evaluate. I do think there are some concerns, like he's getting to the line less often per 36, just a little bit, but it would be a low since he left the Spurs. His 3-point shooting's been bad, but we're talking about tiny samples. Defensively, I think he had slipped defensively, in like even 1920. He wasn't just like,
He's
we're talking
dominant.
right. We're talking about a guy who's like, I will blow up your entire offense just by myself, on or off the ball. So saying he slipped from that is like, well, okay, everybody slips from that. Nobody sustains that for very long. So 15 to 20, I guess, but I don't know what you do with the fact that like on a random, it doesn't matter who else, if he's playing against Steph or Jokic or Giannis or whatever, there's every chance that Kawhi on a given night has more of an impact on winning than any of those guys. It's just, you're not going to get it, 2 nights in a row, 3 times in a week. I don't know what that looks like in a 7-game series either. So just 15 to 20 and just like, we have to punt because it's too hard of a question.
It's almost impossible to answer.
Yeah.
We're on to, though, that was a quick one. That was the only question we had for the Clippers. So next time we do a Western Conference mailbag, get your Clippers questions in.
Yeah. We have a Lakers one. This is from Brian C. Hate to give homework, but you did it anyway, Brian. Thanks a lot. This took me a long time. But wondering if the Lakers would have had cap space if they did not trade for AD. So this is assuming AD would have signed with them July 1st. The Pelicans would have been stubborn and not, acquiesced to what was at the time like a really bizarre, it's since not that weird, but the trade demand but not a demand while you have a couple years left under contract. Now that happens
all
fairly
the time.
frequently. But the idea is basically like if they don't trade for AD and then they also don't give up, we're talking Ingram, Lonzo, Hart, a bunch of picks, including the 4th pick in that draft, which got flipped around, but ended up being DeAndre Hunter. I don't know how you feel about that. What's that look like? And so the problem here is, and because it's a cool thing to think about, I guess, because imagine, you have LeBron and you have all these younger guys, and theoretically you have space to sign, another star and or Davis. We're just spitballing at some point. The timing is the issue here because Davis could not have opted out with New Orleans and signed with the Lakers until after 1920. And so that's the year the Lakers won the title. So you can't really get it both ways. You had to make that trade then. And I don't know why, because that essentially would have amounted to the Lakers waiting for 2 years, with LeBron to go get AD or another star. So yeah, they could have done that, but they won the title in 1920. I think, titles trump everything. But so there are some other kind of interesting, like niche ideas here to explore. So let's say, I don't know if you remember this, but this was a deal that went down on like June 15th, I think, of 2019. And there was all this talk about how if the Lakers had waited until July 30th, they could have essentially made that number 4 pick and used it as outgoing salary and had 32.5 million in cap space instead of 23.7. So there were ways they like kind of botched it. I feel like this is one of the first, like, let's start taking shots at Pelinka situations where that was just like, almost 10 million bucks that just wasn't there. I don't know what the particulars of that were, but that's an issue. So let's say though that they don't make the trade. So you still have LeBron for 37.5 million. KCP is still on the roster for 8, Lonzo for 8.7. We're talking about 1920. Ingram 7.3, Kuzma's there for 2 million, Josh Hart for just under 2, Alex Caruso for 3. That number 4 pick is going to make about 7 million. So you're in like the low 80s in salary with a $109 million cap. That's not enough to have gone out and signed like Kawhi, Kyrie, Middleton, Butler, Durant, even Kemba or Tobias Harris. All those guys made more than the Lakers would have had to give. And that's excluding, like, you got to clear everything else out on that roster, which is tough. They would have been in the range for Al Horford, Bojan Bogdanovic, Malcolm Brogdon, but then you're also not getting Danny Green, who super mattered in that title run with Davis. So yeah, it's interesting. And like where the Lakers are now, having no young talent and no picks, it's interesting to look back at like, how else could this have gone? But you still make that Davis trade 100 times out of 100 in hindsight, because you get a title and LeBron wanted you to. So like those are your 2 factors. Good question though. It kind of made me dive back in and look at like what else could have happened there.
I would agree. And the other thing here too is just like, you don't wait because of what happened with Paul George. You waited on Paul George and he ended up re-signing with the Thunder and then getting traded to the Clippers. And so they had proof of why you don't wait. And I think it's more fair, or I don't know, the word isn't fair because this is an interesting thought exercise, but I think it's more salient to focus on what if they didn't make this litany of other shitty transactions? What if you don't let Alex Caruso walk? What if you don't make the Russ trade? What if you don't even make the Dennis Schroeder trade? Where it's like they treated Danny Green just like salary filler in that deal with a 1st-round pick. So what if you don't make that deal? And those are, I think, bigger turning points for this franchise than one deciding to trade for AD, or as you mentioned, like maybe fucking up the cap machinations of it, not maximizing their spending power. But hey, when the Lakers have even spent everything, they run themselves like a small market franchise at this point. So who knows? I am with you. I make the AD trade. It's the other ones that are just, it's not just the Russ trade. That is the the quintessential Rob Pelinka move. Like just didn't
destructive. Totally destructive.
Yeah, actively destructive. But like you still could have kept Caruso that season, or maybe you never make that Dennis Schroeder trade. I think a lot more people were in support of that at the time than it ended up being. I was always on the fence. It's not a victory lap. It's just, what if you don't make it's their job to be better at this than us anyway. They get paid accordingly. And so what if you don't make even one of those decisions are reversed? You're a much different team right now. And the Westbrook trade is completely inexplicable because you won a title with LeBron and Anthony Davis and then complementary shooting and defense, and you just pivoted entirely away from that. And so that is that's the bigger cardinal sin for Los Angeles. And I think it's it's tough because some people believe that the Disney title shouldn't count, and now we're witnessing the Pelicans. They're like banged up beyond comprehension. They've been shorthanded like every single game this year, but yet they're still contending near the top of the West. And recency is going to kick in, and their future looks incredibly bright. But you make the Anthony Davis trade, even if you could have gotten him for a little less or maximized your books more, you still make that deal.
100%. And like you mentioned the Russ trade and all these other stuff, like they botched the first LeBron season because wasn't that the year that it was like, let's go get playmakers around LeBron. Let's go get Lance Stevenson and Rondo and all these other guys. So like, there's really been the Davis trade arguably is the only good thing that, that this administration has done, because on either side of it, there's just mistakes of all like sizes and shapes, just up and down the history of the Pelinka era.
Let's go to the Memphis Grizzlies. And our first question on them comes from Shalimar the God. Best Dylan Brooks destinations. And so I think this is I do think it's a fair question, just because Dylan Brooks is in the final year of his contract, and who knows if Memphis wants to play him, and it feels like he can still shoot them out of games, but they don't treat him as like someone who's a liability either. And so I want to make that clear. It's not just like this is someone who is going to play like 30 minutes per game for them or whatever, and he's super important to what they want to do on defense. But when you look at teams, so he's on an expiring contract, what are you hoping to get for him at this point? Some teams that I've wondered if they would take a look. Brooklyn, do they have the juice to get him? Charlotte's season is over, so forget them. I thought about Denver, but I don't think he's big enough, and I don't know that they have enough assets to get him. I've also thought about like the Heat would be kind of interesting for him, but I also don't know that they would be giving up equity to the Grizzlies that would make Memphis want to do the deal. And he would be like really interesting on Phoenix this year, I think. But I also think that they're probably looking for someone bigger and more trustworthy as a ball handler. Portland could be interesting, but it's just like they kind of have, or they wanted Gary Payton II to be in that role for them. He's a tough player though to just find a fit for. I think he'd be kind of fun in like maybe Utah, like take a flyer on him. I don't know if you have any other Dylan Brooks destinations that you would like or would intrigue you.
Yeah, I have a Portland question later, and you already said it, but like that, just any place that has these ridiculous, well, this is a top 5 or top 10 offense, but their defense is bottom 5 or bottom 10. Just like get him, because he is kind of a damaging offensive player just with his shot selection. He's been more efficient. I think he's around 34% from 3 this year. But I mean, we've seen, you said like he shoots you out of games. That's just going to happen. But sometimes the juice is worth the squeeze, because he is just a really disruptive defensive piece that kind of changes the tone of every game he's in, especially big games like against the Warriors in particular, because that rivalry is starting to get kind of real. He's just, he is out there doing like Marcus Smart stuff and like Patrick Beverly stuff, just trying to be an irritant in addition to being a really good defensive piece. So, Denver, Portland, Sacramento, like any place like that just needs a big wing to defend and can live with what he's going to do to your offense, I think is like a totally sensible destination for him. But I don't know what he's worth. He's a really difficult player to evaluate in terms of trade assets.
We have 2 other questions for the Grizzlies. Let's see if we can get to. And I apologize if you hear my dogs going bonkers in the background, everybody. Secret Base Vibes asks, is Ja really a plus on defense? And there are some metrics that have kind of grown to like Ja we're not like Ja, but he's graded out as a net positive on defense. I still don't think he's there. I think he's still someone that teams could attack, and he's a good rebounder, which I think is going to help his defensive metrics at relative to his position. He's still someone that teams can go after. I think he's probably been a little bit better when he's getting screened this year. But overall, I wouldn't call Ja a net positive on defense. I don't even think he's entered the territory of like, oh, you can count on him to, I don't want submarine's too strong a word, but like, would you even call him a net even defender? And I'm just not, when you watch him, I'm just not there. He's had moments, and I think a lot of that is like because he has the physical tools and the smarts to do it. But it's tough when you show the load that he does on offense to always be there. And then also, I think that he will benefit from Memphis's overarching defensive infrastructure.
Yeah, I think I gotta generally agree. Like Raptor and EPM both have him as a mild positive defensively, which is like, that's progress. That's impressive. But it's just, he's a little bit like De'Aaron Fox, or how De'Aaron Fox has been, where there's just all this athleticism and speed and quickness, and he doesn't do like his block and steal rates are both in the 20th percentile. So that's like, how is that possible? Why isn't he just, you don't have to be someone that holds up, you know, in one-on-one situations or comes over to help. That's not the expectation for a guy at his size, at his position. But you should be kind of darting around and like, you know, making highlight defensive plays, which you don't really see. So I think on the positive side, that is like a level up area for him. I think if he can be like, you see guards all the time just improve in those areas. Like, you know, Curry is the standout of he was a target and he's not a target anymore. Part of the problem for Morant is the other guys that he plays with are so good defensively that there's really nowhere else to like pick at except for him. So he does get a lot of attention for the wrong reasons that he kind of can't control. Like he's just, you're going to go at Dylan Brooks and Desmond Bane, or you're going to go at Morant. It's pretty easy.
We have time to get this from Shalimar the God asks, if you're Tyler Jenkins, what are you doing with the half court offense after the Christmas Day loss to the Warriors? I probably am not playing Brandon Clark against the Warriors anymore. Might be step one. He just seems like food for them. The other thing I probably would look into not to doing is like, hey, Desmond Bane just needs more time. He was, you know, his creation is up even relative to last year when he already made a leap. They basically doubled his pick and roll volume this year. Let's see him get more reps under his belt. You're also still trying to work Zaire Williams back into the fold. I don't know that you can do a lot of, aside from, you could definitely change up your front court rotations a little bit where it's, well, maybe we're just going, you know, and Steven Adams wasn't bad in that game. So you can get away with minutes with him against the Warriors, but maybe you're just deciding like, well, we're going to try and mismatch the hell out of them or just play all Jaren at the 5 the entire time without Brandon Clark being on the court. You could try that, see how it works. I think this is, if you're truly worried about Memphis' half court offense, which is fair to worry because they are 23rd or 24th in half court efficiency, they need to look for outside help. And I don't think it needs to be a star. I was wrong on the Grizzlies this season. They look like a contender at full strength. Can you get someone like a Bojan Bogdanovic or a Kyle Kuzma type? Those feel like players that could really help them, specifically in the matchup against the Warriors, but just in general when you're looking at their playoff stock.
Yeah, the other things I'd add are make sure Jaren Jackson doesn't commit a stupid fourth foul like 5 seconds into the second half.
So much better about not doing that lately that it almost was just to. Yeah. I didn't see the game. I've heard about it. I was almost shocked that was just one of the. It's like, oh, he's been so under control. Good for him.
He has been better, but it's just that's kind of your answer for if you're looking to find a different look and against a good defense. Is just, you know, his 3-point shooting has been so inconsistent year to year, but if you want a different look, put him at the 5 and maybe you space the floor out a little bit and you can go at some, you know, it's easier to go at someone like Poole with the floor spaced and things like that. And make Desmond Bane make a couple shots. Like the Grizzlies just didn't shoot the ball well. That's another factor in that game.
If I were the Grizzlies, I would hit more threes. I would simply just hit more threes, and that would be how I remedy.
Shoot it better.
I say we end it there. There's another question. We have other questions. I might try to get to them later this week.
I'll take us out. Thanks again, everybody, for all your questions. Keep them coming. We'll do the East at some point here. As Dan mentioned at the top, please remember to rate, review, subscribe. Get us on wherever you listen to your podcasts. We've got our socials here. If you're watching on YouTube, check us out. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Instagram and every place else. Tell your friends. Word of mouth still really helps. Give us 5 stars all over the place. And lastly, I guess I want to apologize. I'll have to apologize to Jared Allen for not apologizing, but I will apologize to Lauri Markkanen this week. And we leave, as we always do, with a shout out to the one and only Frank Ntilikina.